Hi, in this lecture you will learn how to use cursors with parameters. In our previous lecture I said that when we declare a cursor, we can use it as many times as we wish. But most of the times we may need some change on that cursor. Let's say if we are getting the salaries of the employees, we do that in a loop. But this does not help all the time. Especially when you learn how to use functions, procedures, etc., you will need to use the same cursor with different values. In these situations, we use cursors with parameters. Cursors can be declared with parameters, and with this way, it returns different values for the different parameters. But be sure that before you open the same cursor with the parameter, you need to close the cursor. We know that we cannot open the same cursor before we close it. Otherwise, we will have an error. So how we use that? We specify scalar variables for our cursor and use that variables inside of our select statement. We can specify one or more parameters. We specify the parameter names and data types right after the cursor name and inside of the parentheses. If we have multiple parameters, we divide them with comma signs. Notice that we don't specify the size of our variables. We only write the data type like varchar2, number, etc. We don't say that it will be varchar2 50 or something. We only say varchar2. Now let's see how we use parameters with cursors. We have two different usages with cursors and loops. This one is the first usage. Let's start with the first one and continue with the other. I will show you the second way on the example. Now, let's open up the SQL developer and make our example. Declare. Now, we need to declare our cursor with parameters. Let me type first, then explain on that. Cursor, c_amps, and our parameters, p_depth, id is number. And is select first name, last name, department name, from the employees, join departments using department ID. In our var class, department ID is equal to p_depth ID. As we can see, we typed our parameter right after the cursor name and its type has no size. Then we use that parameter in our var class with the same name. But be careful, do not select your parameter name with the column names of the tables. Otherwise, we may have different values. I will show you that. Now, we will declare our cursor variable. v_amps is c_amps %row type. And our begin keyword. Now we will open our cursor, but this time we need to specify our parameter value inside of the parentheses. Open c_amps and the parameter value is, let's say, 20. The rest is the same. Let's type that. Fetch c_amps into v_amps. dbms output dot put line the employees in department of vamps dot department name and r, then close the cursor. Now in the first usage we get only department ID because I want to show you the department ID first. Now let's use the same cursor to print all the employees who work in this department. With this way we will see that we can use the same cursor for many times. Open c_amps with the value of 20 again and loop, and in loop I write fetch c underscore amps into v underscore amps. Then our exit when c underscore amps person not found, and dbms output dot put line vamps dot first name concatenate with a space, then vamps dot last name. Our end loop, and we are closing our cursor and our end keyword. Now let's run it. We have a typo here, not found. Let me clear up and run again. As we can see, we use the cursor for 2 times, but with the same parameters. But this is not the actual reason. First, let me show you how to use SQL Developer bind variables with our parameters. Then I will show you how to use with different parameters. Now let's change our parameter values with bind variables. b underscore depth id, let's say. With this usage, we type our value for only 1 time. Now let's run it. Now I write 20 in here and run it. As we can see, we assigned our value for only 1 time. If we do not do that, when we want to check the department ID 30, for example, we need to change all the variables one by one. We may use the same number for 10 times. We need to change whole 10 values. But with this way, we change our value for only 1 time and they will all have our new value. But this is not our point. We need to use parameters with different values. I type that only to show you how to use bind variables in your code to decrease your coding time. Because we generally use the same numbers in many different places in our code and want to change that number sometimes. If we use SQL Developer bind variables, it will be much easier and faster. Now, let's copy paste our code and print another department. Let's change the bind variable names with 2 and run again. For the b depth ID 2, I select 30, for example, and b depth ID is 20. Now let's run it. As we can see, we printed 2 different departments with only 1 cursor declaration. Now, we said that we have 2 different uses of cursor loops with parameters. This one is the first one. Open the cursor with parameter. The second one is the for in clause. We know that we don't open the cursor with the for in clause. So how do we do that? Let me show you on this example. Now, let's change the last loop with the for loop. For I in c underscore amps, in parentheses I write b depth id 2 and loop. Now I am deleting open, fetch, and close, and the exit when clause. We type our parameter right after the cursor name. It's pretty simple. Let's run it. We have all done in here, so because we did not change vamps with I. So I'm changing this and clearing up and running again. See that? No difference, but much easier usage. Now, we said that we can use more than 1 parameters at the same time. Now let's make another example for that. First, let's add a new parameter into our cursor. pjob id is varchar. Now let's add a new job ID column in our select statement and use the job ID parameter in our where clause. And in our where clause, I write and job ID is equal to p underscore job ID. Now let's clear up all these. I use the for in clause since it is much better. I generally use that. Now let's print a new line and copy paste our loop to get another department. Copy paste and put a single dash, for example, and copy that code and paste in here and change the parameters now. I write 50 and let's say stman. And in here I write, let's say 80, and for the second parameter I write SA manager, for example. Now let me write the job IDs in here and put a dash between them and I dot job ID. And let me copy that, paste in here. Now let's run it. Great, we used two parameters with our cursor. Besides, we got different results from the same cursor with the different parameters. But be sure that your parameters and the values that you assign into the parameters must be matched in order. Otherwise, you may have an error. The last thing, I said that do not select your parameter name with the same name of the columns. Now, let's change our parameter with the name of a column and see what happens. Let's say job ID. And paste that in here. Now let's run again. As we can see, we have a completely different result set because the database server confused about the job ID if it is a column or a parameter. It takes that as column, and since the column values will be equal because you compare the column with itself, so the job ID restriction will not work. So there may be such a problem if you select the parameter with the same name of a column. So use a notation like p underscore or something. Great. Do we use cursors with parameters in our code in real life? Absolutely. Especially when you use cursors with functions, procedures, etc. But we use that with anonymous blocks too. You will need to use the same cursor with different values in your job. Alright, now you know how to use the cursors with parameters. We will make some more examples in the functions, packages, etc. lectures. You can differentiate these examples based on your needs. So this is the end of this lecture. See you in the next one.